emotion can come to the surface. It gets real. We're less likely to be, using the right language or saying anything that we ever want recorded, right? We're not always our best selves in conflict.
Right. Okay.
And because it gets real, we can actually create a bond that's not possible when everybody's calm and peaceful. Okay. Because there's just a little more edge, there's a little more vulnerability in the room. So just kind of like Brene Brown says, well, you got to have vulnerability to create trust and connection. That includes conflict. Conflict creates that vulnerability.
Welcome to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by my man, Audley Stevenson, the Odd Man. He'll unpack wisdom and insights from a cross-section of top quality performers in business, media, sports, entertainment, and lifestyle to uncover key elements to help you live your best audacious life ever. So without further ado, here is the Odd Man.
Greetings and salutations, folks. Audley Stevenson back for another edition of hands down the most audacious podcast you're going to find on the internet. Of that, I promise you. This is the Audacious Living Podcast, and I appreciate you for being here as we continue our ongoing goal of helping our listeners live their best audacious lives ever. As always, I encourage you to connect with us through our social media channels. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under the handle The Audacious Pod. And then if you head over to YouTube, you can subscribe to our channel by tapping that bell down below. And that way you're connected to all great things audacious related. Now, the topic of conversation on this edition of the podcast will be centered around conflict, or more specifically, the importance of not shying away from conflict and instead attacking it head on. Conflict is definitely a hot topic and one we've discussed previously on this podcast, and because it's so important, it's such an important one, I'm sure it's a topic that will undoubtedly come up before, but again, it's such an important one, it's a hot one, and because we all face it, right? It's something that we all go through, it's unavoidable, and it's our approach and how we respond to it. And like I said before, we're going to be zeroing in specifically on confronting conflict, because that is definitely the key to our overall growth and even overall connection to one another. Kristine Scott hangs out with me on this edition of the podcast to discuss the matter further. She is a self-described conflict revolutionary who is the owner of a CEO of Seattle Conflict Resolution, where she trains individuals and groups to handle conflict instead of avoiding it. So much of our approach to conflict is about how we manage our own emotions, that we don't freak out and get out of control. And Kristine certainly helps with that, especially when conflict comes knocking on the door. This is a specialty of hers, and you'll hear about that as part of her work as well. If you really think about it, if we can change our approach to conflict and view it as an opportunity to engage and connect with others, that can go a long way in changing our perspective of really what conflict is and especially what it does to us on the inside. So I think the stage has been set. It's time now to turn to my conversation with Kristine Scott. Enjoy. Kristine, thank you for joining me today on the Audacious Living Podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to hang out with you and spend some time today.
Thank you so much, Audley. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yes, thank you. And I'm always up for a great dialogue. And and conversation, and to be able, and we're going to get into, you do a lot of work in the area of conflict resolution, so we definitely going to get into that, particularly how it can help us as individuals and manage relationships. And then the other piece that I would absolutely looking forward to getting to as well is just the human connections, because connections are also a big part of your work, and that itself has a whole bunch of other layers. And so looking forward to that. Maybe let's just kind of dive into your work in the area of conflict resolution. That's a tough one for a lot of people, Kristine. Oftentimes, many of us, and sometimes myself included, we want to shy away from it because it's the easier thing to do, or so we think. It's less problems, and it's just better to avoid it altogether. But there are some hazards in avoiding conflict, isn't there?
Oh yeah, if we avoid it, it's just going to come back later. I don't know if you've ever noticed, like, oh wow, I successfully dodged that bullet, and then a week later, it's now bigger and hairier.
Right. That bullet is a boomerang.
It is. There's, people, when they feel unresolved, they find a way. They find a way, and sometimes it's not the way you're hoping.
Right. So let's sort of talk about, and from your perspective, why is it that conflict can be so difficult? And I know it's not going to be the same for everyone. We've all got our own, maybe it's our experience with conflict. Maybe conflict has always been a bad thing, so you don't want to be in that bad space, or people don't know how to deal with it, or they just don't like it, or the emotions to bring out of it. Maybe you sort of talk about what you see from your experience.
Well, I think there's a few myths about conflict, and that is that if I handle it poorly, I'm the bad guy. Nobody will like me, and I need to be nice.
Right.
And so we work really hard to be nice, especially in the workplace, because, our professional reputation's on the line. But then that is code for not really resolving whatever it is that's asking for our attention. So being nice tends to kick the can down the road. And like we mentioned, that grows into something bigger and uglier. Right. And you look at the Great Resignation, like, why are these people quitting? The number 2 top reason that they quit is they don't feel respected.
Yeah.
Right. And being nice is not the same as respecting people. Respecting people requires like a lean in when somebody says, hey, I don't really like that decision. Can you explain that to me?
Right.
Right. Yeah. And, I come from many years of managing nonprofits where, I was promoted because I knew how to raise money, but that doesn't mean I knew how to raise people.
Got you. Two different things. Two different skill
sets. And I see that a lot with people in middle management, like they're really good at doing that thing that they're telling other people to do, but they're not so good at like understanding those people. And this is particularly true of those of us that are Gen X. I don't know if you happen to be born after, or before 1980, but we have a different way of relating to the work than the millennials and the Gen Z folks, right? They come in with a big question mark of, well, why is this important?
Yeah, just to explain it to me and help me understand it. And I think what happens in the Gen Xers, as myself, you're challenging. You're not allowed to question. What are you doing? Wait a second, like that's a no-fly zone. What are you doing, right?
And there's some new research that shows when somebody comes at you oddly and says, well, why should I do it that way? Inside your no-fly zone is saying, whoop, 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 you are questioning my authority. You may not pass this area, right? And
who do you think you are?
Right? So what we've learned about our biology is that questioning of our authority is interpreted by our biology the same way as if somebody pulled a weapon on you.
Got you.
You're going to respond with this, how dare you question me? I reign supreme, kind of jerky move.
Yes. Understood.
That even if we don't show it outwardly, it's kind of running the show inwardly.
Right.
And that's why so many of these folks, these younger folks, are quitting, because they can't have real conversations without stepping on this mammal mode that's called our sympathetic nervous system, going into fight, flight, freeze. Oh my gosh, I've been questioned. I must either squelch this or just push it off on somebody else because I don't know how to handle this.
That's that ego taking over, right? And it's really interesting because our ego can take us down this long, windy, messy path if we let it. I have found that it's what's helpful is if you replace that why question with almost with a how come, or help me understand, right? Because you do get a different type of response. The antenna doesn't go up right away, isn't that so?
Yep. And be really conscious about the resources you have to have the conversation. Never have that conversation when you're rushed, when you feel like it was a surprise or sudden attack from the from the left flank, and you're like, what? Right? Like just my pat answer is, wow, that's a great question. Can we circle back in a one-on-one? Right. Know that you're going to show up to this more hopefully gentle lean in when even though you have the temptation to lash out, like listen to that temptation and kind of go, oh, okay, this is one of those times that this conversation is going to need more than 2 minutes.
Right. No, understood. Yeah. I remember once I was, managing a group of people. There's one individual who, we just had communication issues. Like we just, whatever it is, our styles didn't mesh. And I remember several years ago, and I remember thinking, so if I manage a group of 40 people and I'm getting through the 39, I'm not getting through that one, then I'm not the issue, right? And I really had to check myself because I'm playing a numbers game, right? Like 39 out of 40 is pretty good. So I'm not the problem. That individual is a problem. And it's a really interesting process to go through. Now, when you sort of step back and you can analyze your own self, you're like, yeah, but I still wasn't getting through to that one person. So it was my issue. And I didn't need to, I needed to check myself. And I think sometimes and so when you talk about and I think it's a really good point when you talk about sort of taking a step back and giving it the proper time that's due. That is an important exercise to go through because we need in that, like, to check ourselves in that moment. It's not always the easiest thing to do. We need to process ourselves, and so and that's something I think leaders need to be mindful of. Absolutely.
Oh yeah, and the places that we have the biggest reactions are the places that we need our own healing.
Yeah.
So I encourage my clients, like, hey, write down the stuff that gets under your skin. Just keep a little under my skin journal, and at the end of the month, you will see a theme. You will see like, oh, what does that say about how I feel about this area of my expertise? Like, I'm getting a lot of pushback in like how I make decisions around this or whatever I feel about that. And you'll start to realize, oh, I need some resources. I need some training. I need some me time in those areas because other people are letting me know pretty clearly and that's not my strength.
Right.
Especially as managers, we don't usually get lots of good feedback about our weaknesses.
Right. Yeah, no, it's true. And I think a big part of that is a time thing. And that's why it goes back to your point, the significance in making that time, whether you put it in your calendar, your journal, your schedule, whatever, but you absolutely got to make that time. So I think it's a really good point. The fear component and the fear of conflict. Again, there's different reasons for, different things why we fear. We're all different. We're not all the same, but it still does exist. I don't know if you can spend some time just sort of talking about fear as it relates to conflict, Kristine.
Yeah, there's like 4 myths around conflict that I talk about. And one of them we just mentioned, which is I'm worried that people won't like me.
Okay.
Right. Like if I don't handle conflict well, or if I let my inner like mammal come out, it's going to scare everybody in the room, then nobody will like me. Right. Like, so there's that fear of conflict because when our biology takes over, we have only 2 ways to go, too big or too small. Like that's our biology in its finest. It helped us survive thousands and thousands of generations of being the prey and not the predator, right? It's like, just like, okay, I've either got to be like faster and stronger than this, or I've just got to like, hide, duck, maybe freeze a little bit. They won't think that I'm edible, and so both of those responses, of course, do blow up conflict. The first response says, oh, you're going to take me down, I'm going to take you down.
Right.
And then the second response is, I don't hear you, nobody's home, right? Both of those feel very traumatic or unresolved for the person who has the issue with us. So the fear of not being liked. And there's also this sociology, that we live in a country that has a ranking system, and that, if you're at this part of the class structure or the race structure or the gender, we have all of these ways that we rank each other. And so that makes conflict more complicated, because if I'm going up against somebody with more points than I have, I'm more likely to not have much confidence in how I enter that conflict. Or vice versa, if I have more points than the other person, I don't feel like I have as much obligation to understand their perspective.
Got you.
So that's one of the myths that I really untangle for folks. Like, hey, look at how this ranking system, which we're constantly running without even thinking about it, look at how that, because what we've learned about implicit bias is when we're stressed is when it shows up.
Got you.
It doesn't show up when you and I are just chatting all nice on the podcast, right? Yeah, it shows up when that adrenaline and that cortisol start to pump through our bodies, and then, oh, wow, that structure is there.
Yeah.
So, and the other reason is like when that biology is going, is we worry that people are going to get hurt. Those of us that were raised in environments where there was physical intimidation or whatever, we think, oh my gosh, that person's angry. Oh no. So we bring up all of our old emotions and associations with big feelings, and big feelings are hard for humans.
Right.
When you ask the average American, can you name the emotion you're having at the time you're having it?
They can't do it.
Only a third of us can. I would like to say I'm in that group. I don't know, but it's pretty rare. So most of us are making decisions that go first through our emotional centers without even acknowledging that we have emotions in the first place. So imagine we all walk into this job with these different associations around emotion, around fear, around anger, and it's a mess. We don't acknowledge the role that plays in that conflict. And then the other myth is that women can't handle conflict. That's a big part of that that gender, that social thing. The
ranking, it kind of fits in with the ranking a little bit, no?
It does. Yes, for sure. And I coach a lot of women around how to increase their confidence.
Yes.
So that it's bigger than the conflict. Just the number one message that I think a lot of women need to hear is, guess what? It's not about you.
Right.
Because we've been socialized. If somebody's unhappy, it's my fault.
Yes, understood. What I find interesting about those myths, and thank you for sharing those, Kristine, what I really find interesting is that all of them, they're all based on what we think in our heads. And there's no evidence, physical, concrete evidence that we have that can validate or support the things in our head. And so when we stay in our heads and we don't come out of it, that's where, the chaos happens, and, you're in conflict with someone else and they're not even aware of it because you've got all these things that are going on in your head, right?
Right. No, you named it really well. As a matter of fact, I encourage people, if somebody seems to be mean mugging you, ask them what's going on. And everybody looks at me like, what? Why would I do that? I know they're hating on me. Why would I go and ask them? And I said, just do it as an experiment. And you're going to find out 85% of the time, you just happened to be on the wrong side of their bad mood, and it had nothing to do with them. They're thinking about an argument they had at home, and you're just in that glare.
But I think also what's really interesting about that point is we're also in our own heads, right? So that person's in their head going on whatever is happening, and they see us and we react to it because now we're in our heads. And we're not going, oh, well, I didn't do nothing to them, but it's not about you. And that's where I think there's some really good benefits in us offering grace and space to one another. It allows us to have our thoughts, and we all have the right to be free in our world of our thoughts and get lost in it if we want to, but allow that space to, because if you don't, that's where, again, the chaos happens, right?
For sure. Yep. Our biology is not doing us any favors in this stuff.
Right. So I think a natural progression is that connection piece, right? And how we connect with one another. When we sort of talk about the relationship that people have with conflict, if you view conflict as a connection piece and a way of, me understanding you and you understanding me better, and it's not a bad thing. And if the root is to get us to a place of understanding, if that's how you view conflict, your approach to it would be different, wouldn't it?
Oh, definitely. And that's what happened to me. Like, I started my social service career afraid of conflict. It freaked me out. I was working with homeless young people, and my first night, I almost quit. I was in an AmeriCorps position. It was only paying me $900 a month. Right. And it was a small church basement with 50 young people. Fights were breaking out everywhere. There was this one 14-year-old girl that was going around just starting shit wherever she went. My purse was stolen. My food team, the ones that were serving dinner to this outrageous group, right? They were actually hiding behind the food table.
Oh, wow.
It was terrible.
And that was night one.
That was night one. And I was ready to quit at that moment. And then this loud voice boomed out over the whole crowd. And he said, "Hey, little bean, knock it off. You're messing it up for the whole burrito."
I love that. I love that.
And all of a sudden, the whole room got cool. People had manners. There were no more fights. Please and thank you. And I'm just like, what happened here? Right. And these street youth had an accountability to each other, had street families that happened to be a street dad who had authority and standing in the community, because he saw, we're about to lose this meal program and we can't afford to lose this meal program.
Got you.
Right.
Got you.
Yeah. And so they became my greatest teachers. So I went from being scared of conflict to actually listening to people whose lives were on the line in how they handled conflict. And that's when it got real for me. Like, most of the crap that scares us into mammal mode is not going to kill us. Right. But for these guys, it was. For these guys, it was like their threat detectors were so much more accurate than mine. Right. And so I spent years with them understanding and learning how to handle conflict, how to get out of my own discomfort and start looking at it through their lenses. And oh my gosh, they were amazing. And I learned so much that I really honor them as I take this message forward for others.
Right. It very much is just kind of go back to your relationship with conflict and how you view it. If you view it as a tool that can help, then I think that's a really good piece. I've seen a term, conflict resolutionary. Tell me what that is. Help me understand that term.
So when we're in conflict, there's two things that happen. One is we get really honest.
Okay.
And sometimes raw. Emotion can come to the surface. It gets real. We're less likely to be, using the right language or saying anything that we ever want recorded, right? We're not always our best selves in conflict.
Right. Okay.
And because it gets real, we can actually create a bond that's not possible when everybody's calm and peaceful. Okay. Because there's just a little more edge. There's a little more vulnerability in the room. So just kind of like Brene Brown says, well, you got to have vulnerability to create trust and connection. That includes conflict. Conflict creates that vulnerability. So why I call it being a conflict resolutionary is we have this society, we have these work hierarchies, we have all of these ways that have taught us to separate and box people.
Right.
This group is like this, and that group is like that.
Right.
And I'm on here in the food chain, and you're on there in the food, right? Like, and conflict is the great equalizer. It comes in and says, well, forget rank. This person's mad at this person, and right?
Right.
And we
Right.
have to resolve it as humans. And
Right.
in that moment, we can either like look at the hierarchy and say, well, I don't have to listen to you.
Right.
Or we can say, no, tell me what's really going on. And the managers who do that second thing, who get out of their boxes, out of their position, are the ones, according to the research I've seen, who are the most transformational and who get the most loyalty, the most buy-in, the lowest turnover, and get people willing to do stuff that they wouldn't do for anybody else.
Right. Right.
And so that's revolutionary. Right? I mean, that's when you get the lean in instead of the lash out, right?
When you get people that can come together and maybe we even talk about the mediation process itself, because I think when you get to that point where they can come together and sit down, the rankings and who they are and the hierarchy, all that stuff goes out the window. And you talk about vulnerability. There's a certain level of vulnerability. You have to accept that. Like I'm giving away my power to be at equal footing with this individual. Well, maybe in my mind I'm thinking I'm at a higher level but I'm not anymore. And so going through that mediation process, I guess I give a lot of credit to people that I agree to get to that point where, okay, let's sit down, because there's a lot you got to throw out, a lot you got to let go, a lot of emotions, and we'll talk about emotions as well too, but a lot of those things that you have to put to the wayside to get to that common point. And I think that's I have a tremendous amount of respect, regardless what your position is on that, like whether side of the fence you are, for anyone agreeing to enter in that process.
Yeah. It takes some courage.
Yeah, great word.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm glad that you brought up emotions, because a lot of people feel like when you're having that big emotional flooding, feel like, oh my gosh, the world is falling apart. But the truth about intense emotions is we can't hold on to them for more than 20, 25 seconds. Like really intense emotions, they just pass through us.
Right.
It takes a lot of energy to be intensely rageful or intensely sad. It just drains you, and then you move down the line to the less intense version of that emotion. And so I encourage people just let it pass, just like hold space and know it's going to go away if you give it attention. If you fight it and you meet it with resistance, then you actually add fuel to it. Then if you just say, wow, you're really upset about this, tell me more.
Yeah. When I was a kid, I was a big fan of the Incredible Hulk. But eventually he turned to Bruce Banner. He didn't stay rageful and angry all the time, right? He let it pass through it. And it's funny because you think about that when the matter he got is because, to your point, there was resistance, right? There was fighting back. But if you just allow it to pass through, and I think that 20 to 25 seconds is a wonderful marker, and even a great reminder for ourselves. If you let it to pass through, that intensity wanes down, and when that intensity lowers, you're more apt to hear and understand and be open.
Yeah, especially if you're smart enough to say, "Wow, I would be angry if that happened to me." Right? Oh, instant rapport building. Now, not only has this person trusted you enough to show you a less attractive version of themselves, but they feel this connection because you can relate to their feeling.
Right. So we're really talking about here de-escalating ourselves, right? And that in itself is a process, isn't it, Kristine?
Oh yeah. I do 2-hour trainings with teams, and I pretty much spend the first hour teaching them how to de-escalate themselves.
Wow.
And then the second hour, I say, okay, here's some tools. Let's act out some scenarios that you see here at this workplace, and we're going to de-escalate each other. And
that's hard. That's hard, Kristine.
It's great, though. It's so fabulous. It sounds hard, but by then they're just like, yeah. I want to try it. And what I notice is they start coming up with harder and harder scenarios.
What if he did this to me?
That's right. Yeah. Because we all have those buttons, right? We all have that, like I was working with the security team at a 4-star hotel last week. And And one of them admitted like, oh, once they spit in my face, the gloves are off, man. It's like, yeah, there's like half of the room just said, oh yeah, that one's mine too. But then the other half of the room, I said, okay, so you guys, when somebody spits in those guys' faces, I want you to swap in, because they have just entered the zone of, I can no longer control how I react.
Got you. Is it a series of steps, or what? I mean, if you can kind of give us a quick sort of, I know you do this in 2 hours, but just to kind of get a quick understanding of what that process looks like. Because as you use the example from the security team, being spit in the face, we all have that trigger, that button where we, this is my line, and you get there, then you're getting the worst of me, right?
Right. Yeah. I encourage people, know where your line is. Okay. Some of them you can work on. Some of them, like when you make that list of the stuff that gets under your skin, the ones that you have less charge on, you can start to tackle those pretty easily as you learn to de-escalate yourself. I give people some tips around hacking their biology, how to interrupt it when that fight, flight, freeze starts to come up, and your little lizard or your tiny bunny starts making decisions for you. It's like, okay, here's how to interrupt that. I show them some techniques to stop that in their bodies. And here's this ranking thing, and here's some other things around how emotion plays a role. Okay, so now that you have all of that, always give yourself permission to step out. You feel those things happening to you. Okay, here's my 5 minutes. I'm going to go over here, and then I'm going to come back. Because the moment we tell our bodies, by our breathing, by where we stand, or how close we are to the situation, the moment we tell our bodies, oh, I have another option, I don't have to handle this right this second, then the alarm bells stop sounding. Gotcha. Our body says, oh, I'm at choice here. And we have a lot more ability to navigate it with that pause.
Right. I love that, because it really, and we talk about, again, it goes back to taking control of your emotions, right? And when you can do that and do that effectively, it allows time for that grace in that space. And so I think, enough can't be said of how important it is that, we keep our emotions in check, Kristine.
Or if we know we're going to have them, just have them privately. Yeah, one of my favorite techniques is called the silent scream, where you just like go into the bathroom and just freeze frame yourself in absolute like, just, it could be totally without a sound, but just doing that in your body just for 2 seconds tells your body like, yeah, I get that that's how you feel right now. Here it is. Okay, I'm good now. Because those emotions are going to be there. We can't really squish them down. We have to acknowledge them somehow, but just not out on other people.
That's really is an important point, Kristine. Acknowledging the emotions. We can't keep them bottled up forever. I think we're stripping down a piece of ourselves by doing so. And as much as we think that we're exhibiting great strength, it's the exact opposite, isn't it?
Well, our bodies remember that stuff. So once that adrenaline and that cortisol are released into our bodies are like ready to run for their lives or to fight like hell or whatever they're going to do. But our bodies don't know if it's been resolved unless there's some exertion of physical energy. So like if you do like a basketball game after like 5 hours after you've had this big stare down with somebody, your body doesn't know if the physical energy that you expended during that game is or is not connected to that earlier incident. So you're going to be less likely to be traumatized and store your association with that original situation. So basically, as long as you move yourself at least 10 minutes of elevated heart rate and cardiovascular workout within 24 hours of a situation, you're good. Your body feels resolved.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's a direct connection to our body and these emotions, and even to how it impacts us physically. And I think sometimes I don't know how much that is recognized by individuals, where these stored up emotions, and all of a sudden, I've got this pain here, and so when you talk about our bodies remembering, there is a direct connection, isn't there?
Oh yeah, no, there's been studies that have showed high blood pressure, autoimmune deficiencies, and and other types of ailments that are directly connected to poor stress management, on the job stress, creating trauma, creating burnout. And trauma and burnout, post lockdown, ongoing COVID, all that stuff that's happening to us, trauma and burnout are a really big contributing factor to our mental well-being not being so great.
Yeah. There definitely is a connection, and I'm not so glad our sort of conversation went down that path, because there's not mutually exclusive silos going on here where this is this and this is it. We in our totality, we are one, and everything that comes out is all connected and feeds into something. Whether that incident happened last week or last month, there is a connection between the two.
Yeah, and everybody's super stressed right now. And we're taking it out on each other. We're taking it out on the people that wait on us in service settings. There's a lot of data that shows, this is why the resignation levels are so high in customer service jobs. And some of the things I want, people who are managing other people to look at, as far as, hey, do I have trauma? Do I have burnout on my team? Is if you see signs of mental exhaustion, people who can't focus, who have a hard time really getting clear, people who used to be very concise and articulate are now just kind of like, that's one of the signs. You'll see a drop in productivity, right? People who used to be able to handle those 5 projects a week are now getting barely by with 3.
Right.
Ooh, okay.
Right.
That's a sign. And there's also a very common loss of positive self-concept. Right. People who used to be really confident and very capable and articulate about, this is who I am and this is what I bring and this is the value I bring to the company, are now like, oh, okay. I'm not feeling so good about myself right now. Like, burnout just takes all of the best in us and pulls it out of us. It's really sad.
Fatigue and burnout, absolutely, and again, we talk often on this podcast about how you live your best audacious life, and if things like burnout and exhaustion, fatigue, and the mental stress exist, that's going to prevent you from going to where you're trying to achieve. And so, how we manage our relationships and how we manage conflict, they're all connected to where we want to be in life. So I think that's another really good point that you make there.
Thank you.
When we talk about leaders, Kristine, and I think this is a point that's oftentimes forgetting. And we'll use even the pandemic as an example. Leaders themselves, and they've got this team of people that they're responsible for, but they themselves are also going through the very same pandemic. They weren't excluded from that as well. And I think for leaders, that's where the added pressure would come on, because you've got to manage your own emotions related to this thing, which could be very identical to the people that you're leading, but then you've also got to continue to lead them effectively. And that can be really stressful.
Oh, for sure. And I think my number one bit of advice there is model what you want them to do. If you want them to take care of themselves and you haven't had any time off, what message is that sending?
Right.
If you want them to have good work-life balance and boundaries, but they can call you even though they know it's your kid's birthday party, just set the tone of what it is that you want to have happen.
Yeah. No, I think it's a really good point. And the ability to connect, I know we talked earlier about the connection piece, but I think it also kind of goes back to that, because I think your ability to connect as a leader to the people that you're leading can help you be able to achieve some of the things that you're going after. And again, enough can't be said about just positive human connections.
Oh yeah, you're exactly right. Like really leaning in, even though you feel like you have this wounded, raw place, just acknowledging it, naming it, and saying, hey, I'm feeling stressed right now, and I'm not feeling really good about some of the decisions coming out of corporate. And can we talk openly about that?
Yeah.
That it's okay. It's okay for us to just kind of drop the party line long enough to be human together.
The vulnerability piece right there. I mean, you're being vulnerable. I'm human too, and I'm affected. I'm impacted. I don't feel good about it, but yeah, we still need to proceed forward. I think that's really the important part in all that. We got to proceed forward.
Yep, for sure.
I wonder if you could talk about the work that you do with companies and specifically, and I want to give you an opportunity to make sure people know about your work and understand how perhaps you could best help them.
Great, thank you. So I started Seattle Conflict Resolution 5 years ago. And what had happened is many years ago, I was running a shelter program and I had no budget for staffing.
Right.
But I happened to be right next to the University of Washington. So it was very easy to get college student volunteers who are looking for community service hours.
Right.
The shelter was for 18 to 25-year-olds. The college students were 18 to 25-year-olds. So I was basically having the world's craziest sleepover every night of the week on this church basement floor for 45 young people from the streets and 12 college students who were supposed to be in charge of this mess, right?
Right.
And my challenge was, how do I take all these lessons that I learned from the people that I serve around conflict and train these college students who are, mostly from pretty protected white suburban experiences. And so I started trying it and I got better each month until I finally got to the point where other agencies are sending me their staff.
Okay.
And saying, hey, could you train my people too? Like, oh, okay. And then I realized, hey, I should start charging money for this. This is getting popular.
Right.
And then the Space Needle reached out and said, hey, could you train our elevator operators? And then, it just it just grew from there. And so what I do is not actually mediation, not actually tactical security style stuff. I no longer train people in physical response. What I've learned is non-physical response works most of the time and is where we create that connection. And so I now train people, and I can basically do a whole public facing team, somewhere between 10 and 40 people at a time, either online or in person. Number one, how to de-escalate yourself and make sure your best self shows up, your most resource self shows up to this conflict. And number two, how to help somebody else when they're not feeling their best self. And I do that in 2 hours, and it's working great because people are coming back and are calling me up and say, hey, I've hired some new people. Can you come on back? Right. So I know that it's working, especially in this time that our public facing team members are really bearing the brunt of that social angst that's happening right now.
Right. Well, and you're right. I think the angst is extremely high now, and you can just see it on people's faces. It's tenuous, it's stressful, and in some instances you literally can see people like you're ready to blow. Right. And it could have nothing to do with you as the individual in that moment. Who knows what we talked about earlier? Who knows what's going on behind the scenes? And we've got to manage, because we're all, we're all essentially at that same place. We've got to manage that. And so to hear that you offer, and the piece I like is the fact that, the individuals or companies, organizations, they're seeing the value in what you're offering. And they're like, hey, I've got some new, bring them on board too, because we want to kind of cut this off of the past and get them equipped and get them prepared, because we know what's happening out there. So I think that's a great service that you're offering.
Thank you. I really enjoy it.
And so for individuals that wanted to connect with you or learn more about how they can take advantage of what you offer, where's the best place to send them, Kristine?
Yeah, just come to my website, www.seattleconflictresolution.com. And I do give a 30-minute free consultation just to kind of check in with people, find out what's going on in their workplace, and make sure that whatever I propose happen next is appropriate to their needs.
Got you. Yeah, and again, I think it's great because even when we go back to the foundational principles around this podcast, it is very much about sort of living your best life and being bold and audacious and doing the things that we need to do to get to where we want to go. But these connection pieces are key aspects of that. It doesn't make sense that it's almost like I've achieved all these wonderful things, but I don't have internal happiness inside, or I don't have peace, or my relationships around me, or the important relationships around me are not where they should be. And so I think what you're talking about, the value that you offer, is integral and key into us getting to that life that we want to live for ourselves.
Yeah, thank you. I know it's been my greatest teacher.
Awesome. Kristine, this has been a fabulous time. Thank you so much for sharing and the insights and being here. And again, I appreciate for you all that you offer. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
All right, then. Back we are here on the podcast, and I want to send my appreciation and thanks to Kristine for being here and sharing her perspective on conflict and how important it is for us to really looking at our approach and making changes to how we view it. And again, that perception of conflict is so important. If we run away from conflict and everything and do everything we can to avoid it, it'll only get worse down the road, which of course only serves to make things even that much more harder and make the process even that much more painful to go through. Kristine left us with a lot of great points, but if I reflect on our conversation and there's one thing I take from our chat, it would be this. Many of us fear conflict because there's a belief that it's something bad that will generate negative feelings or only create further problems. So instead of engaging or feeling uncomfortable because of these difficult conversations, people go out of their way to avoid conflict altogether, not even realizing that we're only allowing tensions to build by doing so. And in the end, the situation only gets worse. In essence, it's the avoidance of conflict is really what causes the problem. When conflict is handled, poorly, the negative feelings of anger and disrespect takes control of our situation, and that's where things totally spiral out of control. We also lose the ability to connect with one another and build that connection and have a deepening understanding of a other person's point of view, which is oftentimes the root cause of the conflict to begin with. If you view conflict as an opportunity to connect, then we can make huge inroads with one another. But when we kick that can down the road and avoid conflict altogether, we're allowing it and giving it the opportunity to grow into something bigger and uglier. Hey, listen, if you haven't registered for email notifications of the podcast, please know that you can do so simply by heading over to bestaudaciouslife.com, and all you've got to do is enter in your email address and you'll be alerted every time we got brand new content that comes out. We've sadly reached the end of another edition of the Audacious Living Podcast, and as always, send a shout out and thanks to our Audacious listeners. You lovers of Audacious have been absolutely amazing, and I thank you for your ongoing and tremendous support. If you are checking out the podcast in your favorite podcast platform, I encourage you to leave us a review or a 5-star rating. Would be so appreciated, and that will continue to help this podcast grow. Until next time, stay safe, be kind, show love to one another, and be audacious.
You've been listening to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by Audley Stevenson. If you enjoyed what you heard, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Until next time, be audacious.